Benissimo. Inizio brevemente in italiano prima di passare all'inglese. Benvenuto e benvenuti a tutte e tutti. Io sono Matteo Gerlini e oggi segniamo un passo avanti ulteriore in questa collaborazione, scambio e confronto attorno a Taiwan e le tematiche che ruotano attorno di nuovo all'arcipelago e all'interesse della nostra comunità di studi accademica qui nel Dipartimento di Scienze Politiche Internazionali di Siena con i nostri amici taiwanesi e colleghi. Oggi appunto inauguriamo il Taiwan Studies Center, che è frutto di un percorso iniziato ormai qualche anno fa con le prime conferenze organizzate assieme alla rappresentanza italiana, alla rappresentanza di Taiwan in Italia, e che appunto segna l'avvio di una fase ulteriore, una fase di scambio più intenso, anche fisico, fra le nostre comunità con l'arcipelago taiwanese, e una varietà di azioni e di iniziative che illustrerà meglio di me il direttore del Taiwan Studies Center, il collega Andrea Francione. Now I shift to English to introduce you the participant in this first part of the launch meeting of this Taiwan Studies Center. So I will give the floor immediately to Professor Simone Borghesi, who is the delegate of the rector for the international relations of our university. And please, Simone, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matteo. Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Simone Borghesi. I'm the delegate for international relations at the University of Siena. And it's a real pleasure for me to be part today of this introductory panel for many reasons, I would say. As Vice Rector for International Relations, obviously, I very much believe in international relations, and I look at new relations as the ones that are built in this moment, in this very difficult geopolitical situation. I think the East has a lot to offer to our own university and to our communication with other countries. As you know, Siena has a long history of international relations that dates back to its origins, I would say. Along the Via Francigena, we always hosted people from other countries. Now, the Via Francigena is not that doesn't go that far until Taiwan, but certainly it's the mentality that stays. It's a mentality of building bridges, of peaceful communication and peaceful relationship with other countries and communities. And the other reason why I'm so happy to be here today is because the start of this new experience occurs in my own department. And so I'm particularly proud that this is the occasion of something new in my own department. And I think this is a good assist for Professor Yanni, who's sitting next to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. So the floor is for Professor Alessandra Viviani, director-elected of our department. So please, Alessandra, after the assist.
Thank you, Matteo. Thank you, Simone, for the assist. And good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us in Siena today. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you in our department today. As Simone was just mentioning, we are all in the department very proud of being the host of this center. And I would like to thank my colleagues, Matteo Gerlini and Andrea Francione, for their efforts in order to achieve this very important result. At the Department of International and Political Sciences, we're proud in trying to improve and increase our international perspectives. And of course, working together in doing research in, as Simone was mentioning, building bridges with other cultures, other institutions. It's really at the core of what we are and who we are, more than that. I think that it's important to give the opportunity to our students, master degree, BA degree, PhD, of course, to have the chance to see that nowadays, if we want to understand something of the complexities of our realities, we need to work together. It's impossible to do research, it's impossible to understand or to try to understand, and even more to try to find solutions without working hand by hand with other colleagues, with other people, even people who have a different approach to things. It's actually better to have a dialogue with someone that is different from us, because there is always, as Simone was mentioning, something to be learned and something to be appreciated from persons who have different experiences, different cultural background, different languages, different personal histories, and so on and so forth. So I would like just to pledge myself and my department to the successful continuation of this experience. And my door as the future director of the department is always open, and I am really, really hopeful that this will be the first of many occasions to be working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra. And now, maybe the first of our Taiwanese friend that I mentioned before, I'm really happy to give the floor to Gregorio Kuoretseng for his address. Thank you, Gregorio. The floor is yours.
Professor Simone Borghesi, Professoressa Alessandra Viviani, Professor Andrea Pancioni, Professor Matteo Gelini, Dr. Giulio Pugliese, and dear Miss Chachi Wu, distinguished friends and guests. Good day, buongiorno. I'm very happy here to represent the Ministry of Education of the Republic of Taiwan, of China, Taiwan, and the Taipei Representative Office in Italy to witness the inauguration of the Taiwan Study Center, Siena, together with all of you. And our ambassador, Vincent Tsai, had originally planned to attend to this event, but due to an unavoidable official duty, he is unable to be here. And he has asked me to extend his apologies and sincere greetings to all of you. Here, I would also like to especially congratulate Professor Francioni and Gelini. The Taiwan Study Center Siena, which has been long in preparation, is finally established. I also thank the two professors for their hard work in planning and making the establishment of this center possible. In the next 5 years, our office will work closely with the Taiwan Study Center Siena to make this center an important base of promoting Taiwan in Italy, enabling the Italian academic community and the general public to gain a deeper understanding of Taiwan's culture, history, society, and economic development. It will also allow more of Italy's younger generations to engage with and learn about Taiwan through Chinese language courses, publications, exchanges, and research scholarships. We look forward to cultivating more Italian youth interested in Taiwan-related issues through research scholarships and special projects, allowing them to become the seeds of future Taiwan-Italy exchange. Taiwan is a small but vibrant society. Like Italy, we cherish the values of democracy and freedom, and we value cultural heritage and pluralistic coexistence. I deeply believe that with the joint efforts of the University of Siena and our office, the Taiwan Study Center Siena will not only be an academic platform, but also become an important driving force for promoting Taiwan-Italy friendship and cooperation. Finally, please allow me, on behalf of Taiwan, to express my sincere gratitude to the University of Siena and to all of the professors and colleagues who have long supported Taiwan studies. May we work hand in hand to make Taiwan more visible in Italy and pave a broader and deeper path for Taiwan-Italy relation in the future. Thank you all.
So I pass to the second part of this slot of presentation, giving the floor to Professor Andrea Francioni, who is the director of the Taiwan Studies Center. Please, Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matteo. Well, first of all, let me thank all those who contributed their time and efforts to get to this point. That is to say, the establishment of the Taiwan Studies Center at the University of Siena. I just want to give a very brief overview on the development of Taiwan studies. I mean, outside Taiwan and outside the People's Republic of China, because we know that Taiwan studies are very important field of studies, especially in Taiwan. But over the last 2 decades, Taiwan studies has developed as a specific field of studies within Western academia, both in Europe and in the United States. Today, there are a dozen Taiwan Studies Centers all over Europe, in Germany, and in the UK, in France. Just a detail, but as I have mentioned this morning, talking with Matteo and Eleonora, early this morning I received an email from a colleague at the INALCO Institute in Paris. And she asked me to organize something together relating to Taiwan studies in Southern Europe. That is to say, Spain, France, and Italy. And probably we will organize something for next year. Yeah, in Italy, we only have a couple of, at the moment, we only have a couple of Taiwan Studies Center. The first one is at University Roma Tre, and the second one is our own. And so, we have started, I would say that in Italy, we are going to start a new field of study, which is relatively new to Italian academia. Well, just a few details about our center, our mission, and the activities that we will carry out in the next 5 years, as Gregorio Tseng mentioned. Well, first of all, this Taiwan Studies Center is the outcome of common effort. Let's say the Ministry of Education of the Republic of China, and represented by the Taipei Representative Office in Rome, and the Department of Political and International Studies of the University of Siena. At the end of September this year, we signed a memorandum of understanding, and the aim, the basic aim, is to encourage, support, and develop education and research about Taiwan, Taiwan's history, society, language, and culture at the University of Siena. This program goes under the name Navigating a Changing World, which is precisely what we do at our department. We try to imagine how it is possible to navigate troubled waters in terms of international relations. And this program provides for the establishment of Taiwan Studies Center at the University of Siena and our department in particular. And then well, our mission is to develop teaching, research, outreach activities about Taiwan to provide a consistent number of students, scholars, professionals with knowledge and information to broaden their expertise and further disseminate such knowledge, such information to target audiences and a wider public. What about our activities, our future activities? I'm not going to talk about the language course, which is I would say our most important target within the Taiwan Studies Center. Our agreement with the Ministry of Education provides for the establishment of a course under the name Fundamentals of Mandarin Language and Culture, but Chachi Wu will make this point clear. Well, first of all, what about research? What about research in the field of Taiwan studies? The Taiwan Studies Center at the University of Siena will organize each year a 2-day Taiwan seminar meant as a research seminar that addresses Taiwan-related history, politics, society, economy, and international relations issues, obviously to promote, in order to promote the advancement of Taiwan studies in Italy. And then our agreement provides for, and that's an interesting point, I guess, for our colleagues in the department. Our agreement provides for scholarly exchange visits each year. At least 4 scholarly exchanges will be organized between the University of Siena and our partner universities in Taiwan. And scholarly exchange are meant for professors, scholars, or fellows, and those people will conduct with one or more universities in Taiwan teaching and research activities in the fields, and this is a specific provision in our memorandum, in the fields of international economy, international history, international law, and international relations. So there is room for collaboration, not only with our partner universities in Taiwan, but there's room for collaboration with our colleagues from the University of Siena and obviously the Department of Political International and International Studies in particular. We aim at developing Taiwan Studies publication series. Each year we will organize a Taiwan seminar, a research seminar, and the outcome of this activity will be a collective book edited each year. And then we have a very specific research project which deals with the history of relations between, obviously, the Republic of China and Italy, starting with 1912. And the idea, we discussed this thing with Matteo Gerlini and Eleonora Pendino. The idea is to publish a collection of documents related to official relations between the two countries between 1912 and 1970 and 1971. And let me say that in order to carry out this project, we provide for the idea is to award each year 2 scholarships for students and fellows with the Taiwan Studies Center that will help us collect materials in both Taiwanese and Italian archives. And so that's another part of our academic work. And finally, just to involve our students in the activities of the Taiwan Studies Center, I would like to mention that we started, we start right today an internship program. And those students from the department and the University of Siena who want to join us, they can develop an expertise in the field of Taiwan studies, collaborating with the Taiwan Studies Center. For example, today we have our first 3 interns with the Taiwan Studies Center, that is to say, Sara, Lorenzo, and Alessia, I guess so, yep. They will start collecting materials because we aim at publishing a website, the website of the Taiwan Studies Center. But before we put the website online, we have to collect materials, obviously. And our interns will collaborate with the Taiwan Studies Center in order to do so. And I hope that maybe by the beginning of the new year, we will be able to put online the Taiwan Studies Center website. So that's the idea. I guess that I'm finished. But just let me, apart from say thank you to Matteo and Eleonora and Gregorio and Chachi, who helped a lot to put together all things, administrative things and research things, everything. So thanks to them, we have been able to get to this point, the inauguration, the launch meeting of the Taiwan Studies Center. But just to conclude, we work within the academia, we work within the University of Siena, and obviously an important foundation for the healthy growth of Taiwan studies at the University of Siena, and is our ability to safeguard intellectual integrity and to adhere the principles of neutrality in our studies related to Taiwan. So I would like to conclude with this point. Because we know that when we talk about Taiwan-related issues, it's always a sensitive issue somewhere in the world. It's always a sensitive issue. But we are researchers, we are scholars, and we try to carry out our work in the best way possible. So, thank you, Matteo. Thank you, Eleonora. Thank you, Gregorio. Thank you, Chachi. And hope that you will join us. I mean, all of you will join us in our effort to promote Taiwan studies at the University of Siena.
Thank you, Andrea, also to share the same feelings that we share in this small but very committed group to set up this this effort and also this dream that at the end come true. And for this, I'm very glad to give the word to give the floor to Chachi Hu, who has a relevant role in this effort, exactly, not only because of the teaching of the Mandarin. So please, Chachi, the floor is yours.
Buonasera. Hi, everyone. Okay. Firstly, I want to thank Professor Borghesi, Professoressa Viviani, Professore Giallini, Francioni, Professor Giulio Pugliese. It's really a great honor to welcome all of you to this opening of Taiwan Studies Center at the University of Siena. Okay, my name is Jiaqi. I'm Taiwanese, and today, as Professor Simone Borghese just mentioned, and Professor just mentioned, today is really a new bridge that we opened for the relation between Italy and Taiwan. And for me, with the support of Professor Giallini and Francioni, I'm very happy to be the part of the partner of this program of Taiwan Studies Center. And I'll be in charge of this program of languages and culture course. So today I want to bring you on the perspective of Taiwan's languages and cultures. So I hope you are ready to come with me to a journey of Taiwan history wave. Okay, so for me, today is not only for celebrating a new page, okay, a new page of the academic center in University of Siena, but also we are celebrating a really big path for a new thing that we are going to do in this academic year. Okay, as you know, in these years, Taiwan is more famous in the world. People may say Taiwan is small on the map, okay, but in reality, it holds world languages and cultures and history, as you know. At the heart of this center, this Taiwan Studies Center, and our goal is a very deep respect for the diversity and culture in Taiwan. In our course, we are going to prepare and have more research focusing on Taiwan's languages and history, which tell the real story of Taiwanese people. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a very brief knowledge and information about the Taiwan's history for languages, a really big one, because in Taiwan it's not only Mandarin Chinese, we have a lot of languages. We have more than 20 languages in Taiwan. And why? Okay, so long before modern times, Taiwan was home to indigenous people. In Taiwan, there's more than 20 communities of indigenous people, and those languages were one of the oldest and one of the most widespread in the world. Okay, so the indigenous communities such as Ameizu, the people of Amei, Taiya, Taiwan, and others, like more than 20 communities of indigenous people in Taiwan. Until now, they have lived already in Taiwan for more than thousands of years. So they are truly and really Taiwanese people. Okay. Okay, now in Taiwan we have in Taiwan we have about 20 officially recognized indigenous languages, which are still used nowadays by people. And they are part of Taiwan's rich culture heritage. So their languages connect Taiwan to its own history, and connect Taiwan to the wild oceanic network. So basically, it comes from it's originated from Africa, from Madagascar to the Easter Island, so into Isla de la Pascua. So all of these people, they have the original language is from Taiwan. Okay. So this reminds us that Taiwan's story begins in the Pacific. Okay, we have the culture of the sea, we have the culture of the world, and the Pacific. Yeah, this is one I want to share you. And then in the we are in the 17th century, so it's like more than 400 years ago. Yeah, people from southern China arrived in Taiwan, and they bring their languages with them, like Hakka language, and yes, I have my family they are Hakka, okay, and another is a Hokkien language. These two languages they brought from southern China, and now after more than 400 years, these languages become with its own characteristic, and they changed and transformed. In Taiwan, we call it Taiwanese, also known as Taigi, we call it in Taiwanese. Okay. And Taiwanese language now, it's the main spoken language for many communities and for many Taiwanese family for communicate with their friends, their family, and their kids. So if you, Eleonora has just been in Taiwan for 6 months. I don't know if you heard of people speaking Chinese Taiwanese, because in southern Taiwan, most people, they use Taiwanese to communicate with friends and family. So to understand a new culture, the first you will have to understand their language. For example, me, as an example, I speak with my family, with my parents, with my grandparents, in Taiwanese, because they don't understand Chinese. Because they are the older generation. The older generation, they spoke only Taiwanese and Japanese. Okay, and then we have Hakka language. Meanwhile, Hakka language. It's a kind of tells a little bit different things, because Hakka people, they have very strong, very hard work personality, and they have a very strong sense of identity and solidarity among Hakka people. So Hakka is also a very important language in Taiwan. And then we have another language in Taiwan that is Japanese, because from 1895 to 1945, it comes a very long period of Japanese rules. Okay, so during these 50 years, Japanese language became the language of government and education and schooling. So at that period, it also influenced art, architecture, and literature, and a lot of landscape that you can still see in streets of Taiwan, okay, basically. So in fact, many older generation in Taiwan, they still speak Japanese. And then it comes Mandarin Chinese. After 1949, while with the arrival of new communities from mainland China. So from that moment, Mandarin Chinese became the main language of administration and schooling in Taiwan. Mandarin Chinese connected Taiwan to the broader of Mandarin-speaking world. Okay, so from 1949 until now, it's like about 70 years. In Taiwan, we started to use Mandarin Chinese only for 70 years. Okay, so it's a really brief story about Taiwan's languages, but I want to say, the languages in Taiwan, like indigenous languages, Taiwanese, Hakka language, Mandarin Chinese. Does someone think about these things? In a very small island, how can all these languages stay together? We can live together. We work together. We speak together. We exist together in a harmony way, in a dynamic and evolving linguistic landscape. So I would say it's quite interesting, these things. So in our course, I think this is a very important part for in our Taiwan Studies Center to focus on this kind of things, because from my opinion, in Taiwan, it's not really easy to find another place in the world which lots of languages exist together in this way. So the mission of our Taiwan Studies Center, I mean the course of languages and culture, what we can study, what we can do. We can have more research about what we want to, we want to explore more this kind of linguistic and cultural richness. We want to let people know, and we believe that to understand Taiwan, to understand Asia, firstly, we have to listen to the people speaking, the people's voices, and respect. So this is why the Taiwan Studies Center, we are not going to teach only Mandarin Chinese, but I'm going to introduce also students to a real world of languages in Taiwan. So such as Taiwanese course, Hakka course, I would not say also indigenous languages, but so much. Okay, we will try. And to see how people express, how Taiwanese people express their identities. This is a very important part, I think, we have to make more efforts to do. Because I believe that the language is never neutral. It's never it's sensitive. The culture is sensitive. It carries a lot of memory. It carries lots of our history. It carries our past. So through all these kind of things, it connects us to lots of different values, like democracy, like identity, respect, and the freedom to speak, and freedom to be heard, and freedom to say whatever you want, and freedom to be Taiwanese, or freedom to be Hakka, freedom to be indigenous communities, freedom to be Chinese. So whatever, in Taiwan, everything is possible. So at the end, I want to share, study Taiwan's different languages. I want to make one very important point, is to know in the future, I want to make more people, more students know how young generations, okay, in Taiwan are reclaiming their heritage through bilingual and multilingual education, because in Taiwan, everyone is multilingual. It's impossible to find one person who speaks only one language. It doesn't exist. Everyone is bilingual or multilingual. So this, I guess, is the one thing I will be focused on in our program. And then at the end, I want to share the last thing. Our center and the Taiwan languages program will bring these expressions from Taiwan to Siena. It's a really important bridge, a big bridge through. We were going to have this kind of research through public lectures, like what Professor Francioni has mentioned. We will have a lot of workshop, for example. We are going to organize also film festival, like art exhibition, and lots of culture event, and so on. So in this center, we would like to create a place where Italy and Taiwan can meet together, exchange more ideas with other friends, and we can discover the communication and language coexistence. So I believe this center is going to be a home for everyone, for having more dialogue, more creativity, and more collaboration with university, with a lot of professors. And I hope this Taiwan Study Center will be also a place where research can meet a lot of friends in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chachi. I think that this offers a very wide landscape of all the activities and the other issues that we are going to deal with. And at this before to move to the first scientific seminar that we host as Taiwan Studies Center, we have also a ceremonial part in which Andrea will put the stamp of the Taiwan Studies Center on the Memorandum of Understanding that we signed with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So for this I shift again to Italian. Questo è il momento cerimoniale anche saliente. Se volete prendere delle foto le ricorderemo della posizione del timbro, perché il timbro è molto importante nella... Certamente, infatti. Ciaci, vai a dire dove viene messo il timbro. Lo facciamo ora. E poi dopo apriamo il seminario e così nel frattempo sistemiamo le slide di Giulio. Come vedete è un meccanismo perfetto. Certo, siamo pieni di volontari, giusto? L'invito è a essere citizen photograph e di postare sui social tutte le foto che mettete, Instagram, Facebook, anche Truth se volete, dipende dal vostro orientamento.
Do you see the slides, those of you connected online? Qui. Altri dispositivi vorrebbero visualizzare. Ne vedete? Sì, le vedevo.
In the why we are fixing the last things that, of course, after many experience during the pandemic with virtual presentation we had, and the problems are never ending. I briefly introduce our guest speaker very briefly, but I'm very happy to have Giulio Pugliese here. Giulio is a professor at the European University Institute, at the School of Transnational Governance, and at the Robert Schuman Center, in which he coordinates the Asia program. If I remember correctly, Giulio has achieved his PhD at Cambridge University, his postdoc period in Oxford, and he taught also at King's College in London, strategic communication. I think that Giulio is one of the main experts in area studies, as they call, in that we have in Italy as Italian born, and he will present to us the report he wrote with Aurelio Incisa, how to use the maximum of the potential for the EU-Taiwan cooperation, the EU-Taiwan cooperation, sorry, there is a typo. What can the EU learn from the US and other actors? This report will be presented at the EU Parliament in November, if I remember correctly. December. So we have the possibility to discuss it in advance to the European Parliament. That's to say that you are living another one historical moment after the creation of the Taiwan Studies Center in Siena, and Eleonora Pennino will discuss the presentation by Giulio. Eleonora Pennino is a key figure in the creation of the Taiwan Studies Center, as she is the first Huayu students, as it was recalled by Chachi, of our university in Taiwan, and she is specializing for her PhD thesis on the diplomatic on parliamentary diplomacy between Italy, the EU, and Taiwan. So I will give the floor immediately to Giulio, that has has his own microphone. So please, Giulio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Matteo. Yes, indeed, I have speaking power, as the Chinese likes to claim as well. And I have speaking power in no small measure thanks to your invitation, to Professor Andrea Francioni's invitation, and to the leadership team at Siena. And it's a pleasure to be in such a distinguished setting. I hope to do bella figura, as we say in Italian, to be up to the very high standards of academic rigor that have been mentioned by Professor Francioni. Hopefully not rigor mortis, and also to do justice to the very variety of voices and languages that are just like the languages that are spoken in Taiwan. Because I'm actually, first and foremost, you should know, an area study specialist, yes, but of Japan. But as mentioned earlier on, Japan has had a very strong influence over Taiwan, and there is a very deep bond between Japan and Taiwan, and in many ways, Japan is in the first line of advantage in terms of relations vis-a-vis Taiwan, politically, culturally, even strategic in many ways, to the point that Taiwanese people, if you ask and look at Taiwanese public opinion polls, they would actually think that the Japanese government would be the first in the line of defense of Taiwan. And I'm talking about the perception of how important Japan is among the Taiwanese. So let me just make sure that I do justice and count, and hopefully count myself as one of the first friends of the center by giving you this presentation. Be as straightforwardly critical and inquisitive as possible during the Q&A, because this is effectively, as mentioned by Matteo, a testing ground. You'll be my guinea pigs, my sparring partners, so to speak, Eleonora first and foremost, because my co-author and I, who is an actual Taiwan expert, Dr. Aurelio Incisa, who is senior fellow at the Istituto Affari Internazionali in Rome, a long-time collaborator of mine, we have written this 72-page long report, in-depth analysis for the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament to effectively try and find out policy solutions of what the European Union and its member states can do to buttress stability across the Taiwan Strait, with an eye also for supporting Taiwanese democracy. And when we talk about Taiwan, very often, unfortunately, as mentioned earlier, we need to also talk about the context. And we are in an academic setting today, so what we will do, as you will see from the very slides before you, is that in the 20 minutes of presentation time I was given, I will avoid being the over-loquacious Italian. I will blab for hopefully 20, 25 minutes at very most, to give you a sense of what I understand, together with my co-author, with whom we authored a book on Japan-China power politics that was translated into Korean, and an article on the very contestation between Japan and China over the spheres of influence that are aplenty and are being built and denied in the region. And with Aurelio, we've tried to do a deep dive into what Europe, mostly the European Union and its member states, can do in the context of cross-strait relations and helping out democracy and stability in Taiwan and across the Taiwan Strait. But let me bring it back to the academic setting that is the University of Siena, with its Department of Political Science and International Relations, that again has a long-standing history. Because as you will see from the title, I will go and emphasize on something that is not very much understood, that is that the instability across the Taiwan Strait is also a byproduct of the new geopolitics of the first island chain. And I will explain in a second what I mean by the geopolitics of the first island chain. Suffice to say that much of what we witness in terms of a crescendo of military exercises around Taiwan and in the Pacific is not just a byproduct of China's newfound assertiveness, which is particularly evident under the leadership of Xi Jinping. It is also a byproduct of the security dilemma, and some of you might not be fully aware of what I'm talking about if you don't have a security studies or international relations background. But very shortly, a security dilemma is the ability for states to guarantee their own security only by arming themselves and by also witnessing a crescendo in military exercises to deter adversaries and prepare your own forces against your potential enemies. That form of insurance naturally feeds the insecurity of your counterparts. And so what we are witnessing here is that Taiwan is also ensnared into the security dilemmas at play between the United States and China, and to some extent also between Japan and China. And so this action-reaction dynamic feeds the very insecurity, and I will be very straightforward here. This is an argument that I have insisted upon more than Aurelio. So my co-author has a more nuanced perspective that tends to put the most of the blame on China. My understanding instead sees Taiwan within the broader context of what is the power politics of East Asia. So, you know, I've done the formal declarations of where the two authors stand. But how do we then get from there to foster stability across the Taiwan Strait and support Taiwan? While the first half of the presentation will be devoted to the academic claim, the main policy claims will be touched upon very briefly, and I have to excuse myself for giving Eleonora the 72-pager, which is very dense, I am told, by many friends and colleagues. But very briefly, what we try to do in the policy proposals is that Europe needs to really get its act together in fostering area studies expertise. And the Taiwan Studies Center here is a good start. We can go at length into debating what we mean by area studies, but understanding a place from its own history, culture, languages is the first starting point to foster strategic autonomy, if you want, of but is knowledge-based strategic autonomy, of intelligence of what we are studying and understanding, why instead of relying on proxies. But the other policy claims that we insist upon is that Europe needs to be realistic in its deterrence proposals, and its democratic support of Taiwan, that is a very contested society across the political aisle, needs to really touch both sides of the legislative UN, so the main leading governing party and the opposition party, because Taiwan, just like many polities in the West, is a contested polity. It's a contested state where there is infighting, but is incredibly strong. And this has to also go hand in hand, Europe's position, with reassurances that we are really aiming our policies at fostering peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, and so of squaring the circle with what is the European Union member states' one China policies, which is very different from the one China principle, and the European Union's own one China policy. Now, we can skip the methodology and you can have a look at the very paper itself. I'll start from the very main claim, academic claim that I highlighted at the beginning of this seminar. China has been saber-rattling its own military and diplomatic presence, really, and political presence, starting in the region. And it has performed a lot of saber-rattling, first and foremost by virtue of becoming the second world largest economy and developing, especially since the early 2000s, a blue water navy. China was pretty much a land-based military power. It's only in the early 2000s that the People's Liberation Navy starts developing military capabilities that venture into the oceans. And Peter Parker used to say that with greater power comes greater responsibility. Well, if you actually adopt a realist standpoint, we are in the land of Machiavelli after all, with greater power you usually get greater appetite. And China that has had a lot of territorial and maritime disputes. And these are disputes. It has had territorial and maritime disputes with Southeast Asian counterparts, and so you have witnessed a much more risk-prone policy in the South China Sea, starting, I would say, from 2009, where the global financial crisis and the Great Recession has actually fed a much more risk-prone attitude in China. A risk-prone attitude which was always, and I think that area studies experts need to also put themselves in the shoes of systemic rivals and adversaries, a risk-prone attitude that has also been fed by risk-prone postures by China's neighbors. Some of them, for instance, has been the case with regards to the disputed Senkaku Diaoyu Islands with Japan, because it has been Japan's nationalizations of the islands, of 3 of these islands in 2010, that has fed, in 2012, I'm sorry, but has fed China's desire to show the flag by contestating Japan's administrative control of the same by sending Coast Guard ships and official vessels. And so you see, this is a game, this is a logic that has not just to do with China's rise and China's military buildup, but has also much to do with China sometimes reactive, sometimes perhaps reactive in a calculated way to measures and policies taken elsewhere. And China's relationship with Taiwan under the Ma Ying-jeou government was actually very stable, and it was very stable, and it had a very, it had also given space to Taiwan diplomatically under the leadership of this pro-mainland government led by a Kuomintang leader, Ma Ying-jeou. And this picture changes altogether under the leadership and the new administration of President Tsai Ing-wen, that is a government led by the Democratic Progressive Party. This is, in unmistakable terms, a byproduct of China moving the goalpost of its goal of peaceful unification, of expecting, exaggerately so, agreements across the strait that were heavily contested because they were not debated and because they were actually going to prize foreign direct investment from the mainland to Taiwan, and perhaps also empower Taiwanese businessmen that had deep vested interests in the mainland. And the fact that there were very little economic incentives from these very trade agreements and investment agreements under the Ma Ying-jeou period, this has actually fed a protest, the Sunflower Movement protests, that showcased how resilient Taiwanese democracy was in contesting moves that were decided effectively at the top-down elite level. And so, in unmistakable terms, this is China trying to impose its own deals and its own preferred course of action in cross-strait relations. And with the Tsai administration, we have witnessed bully tactics in terms of stealing away states that have recognized the Republic of China, Taiwan, as the sole representative of China, and so having official diplomatic relations with Taiwan have been halved. The countries that have had diplomatic relations with Taiwan in 2016 were about double in size of the ones we have now. And China has also bullied Taiwan with economic statecraft, meaning the use and abuse of economic carrots and sticks to effectively try to sideline DPP members of the Legislative Yuan and the DPP government altogether. So this is the story that we know. And we know that we have also witnessed a crescendo of military exercises across the Taiwan Strait. What we hear less often about is that there are active stakes in preserving Taiwan's de facto independence. And these active stakes in preserving Taiwan's de facto independence are geopolitical in nature. They are part and parcel of a strong desire of Japan and the United States to bottle up China within the first island chain. What is the first island chain? It is a set of islands that stretch from, you could say, northern Japan all the way through Taiwan, the Philippines, Borneo, and the waters of the East China Sea and South China Sea, the ones that effectively you can see pictured in this map, are in many ways relatively shallow, and it's very easy for sensors and for military assets scattered around the East China Sea and the South China Sea to actually pin down Chinese military capabilities that try to venture and pierce through a first island chain. And so this is in many ways a geopolitical construct that dates back to the Cold War. It was actually meant to bottle up the Soviet Union. And there are active stakes in the United States to make sure that China's military assets, including intercontinental ballistic missiles that target the United States, are tracked down through radars and sensors that are across the first island chain. And so, as the military balance in the region changes, there was an interest, an active interest, to beef up the military capabilities of the United States forward deployed in the first island chain. And so this is where the story we don't hear enough about, that is part of the broader story of China's assertiveness. assertiveness, just like Wilhelmine Germany, and this is what I associate China with Wilhelm II Germany, not with Nazi Germany, can be actually pretty much explained by the fears of encirclement of other powers. Remember the dreadnought, remember the international history that we study of how Europe sleepwalked in the First World War. Wilhelmine Germany was a very different beast from the Third Reich. And in many ways, China's foreign and security policy within the East China Sea and the South China Sea and across the Taiwan Strait is a byproduct of hubris and insecurity. And so we are witnessing a missile race with missile assets and new types of missiles being developed that have to be stationed in the islands that you see pictured between Japan and Taiwan, and also in the Philippines, and so north and south of Taiwan. We have more assets aimed at intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance, also in space, but also drones that are underwater drones, on-surface drones, and on-air drones that are being developed. And this is a byproduct of the new National Defense Strategy of 2018. And so it's a byproduct of military moves that have been embryonically conceptualized under the first Trump administration, with the intention to leave China with a bloody nose in case of a contingency scenario across the Taiwan Strait. This is, to all effects, the United States and its allies' version of a A2AD strategy, area access, and now I don't remember the acronym. Anti-area access denial. I know I'm mispronouncing it, so it will come back to me in a second. But it's a defensive strategy aimed at targeting China's military projection across the first island chain to potentially target important assets, including aircraft carriers or warships, with the aforementioned missiles and with even more nimble forces that will be scattered and are being scattered across the territories I mentioned. This has much to do also with new developments between the United States and Japan. And this is important because Japan has never had contingency plans aimed at the Taiwan kinetic war scenario or even a gray zone scenario such as a quarantine or a blockade. Since the first Trump administration, the United States government and the Japanese governments are talking for the first time and have actual operational plans to respond to a potential invasion or to a potential sabotage, whether through quarantine, whether through cyber operations of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And along with these initiatives, the United States government has also pushed for an asymmetric defense strategy that empowers Taiwan along the very A2AD doctrine that I mentioned earlier. Now, what we are witnessing in Europe then is also a byproduct of what has changed ever since the first Trump administration. Remember that according to the United States government, Taiwan is not just a key polity or in fact a de facto state, an independent de facto state, but whose own autonomy needs to be preserved for the sake of safeguarding the well-being and the prosperity of 24 million people. It is also a pawn in the broader context of US-China competition. And so being anti-China in terms of policies fostered in the United States or China in terms of a containment of China's military power. Remember, the objective is to bottle up China's projection across the First Island chain, but being in favor of a policy of containment of Chinese power, military power, economic power, technological power, doesn't necessarily mean pro-Taiwan, because it can actually foster the very instability that you aim to contrast. And so the trick here is to avoid throwing the baby with a dirty bathwater. The problem here is that you want to avoid self-fulfilling prophecy. The key issue that, from my vantage point, we're discussing today is that we want to avoid that China becomes a disruptive power like Russia has. Okay? Because effective, realistic deterrence needs to go hand in hand with reassurances. And in the remainder 7 minutes of my talk, I will conclude by saying, and I'll conclude by sticking with the academic side of the talk, that much of the efforts that have been launched were really at the initiative of the United States government and the Japanese government. This takes a neater shape under the Biden administration, where Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine and China's heavy-handed behavior already under the COVID-19 pandemic, as evidenced by the wolf warrior diplomacy, but also with its de facto enabling role in supporting Russia's war machine, that has fostered a degree of bad press and bad publicity of China's role among European players. But that being said, you have seen under the Biden administration the ability for the Indo-Pacific theater, that is the priority goal of the US government, containment of China, going hand in hand with containment and pushback against Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. And so under a typical Wilsonian foreign policy, according to Democratic Party government that was the one led by the Biden administration, you have techno-democracies fighting techno-autocracies. And by virtue of the war in Ukraine, you have what looks like a crystallization of blocks, where you have an axis of autocracies, witness the unity of purpose of the United States pushing back against Russia with the European Union and with European states, including the United Kingdom, and the unity of purpose within the G7 with like-minded partners such as Japan, South Korea, Australia, which have very often been invited to the G7 plus meetings. And so you have this sort of steering committee of the free world, to use the words of a national security advisor of Biden, Jake Sullivan, uniting as democracies in safeguarding the free world from authoritarian states such as Russia's illegal war of aggression in Ukraine. And with time, and after a year and a half, China helping Russia out, and as evident, also North Korea helping Russia out with military capabilities. And so you see what I'm talking about, a logic of blocks, almost of coalescing blocks. But it's true that much of our support of Taiwan comes from this very logic of democracies fighting autocracies, and also, I would say, in the interest of Taiwan, of false analogies that the Japanese government, for instance, have been insisting upon, such as the analogy that Ukraine today could be East Asia tomorrow. The Russia-Ukraine analogy has caught our imagination in terms of how China interacts with Taiwan across the strait, these are apples and oranges. And we need to be very careful in not mixing the two up, because again, there is the ability to deter Chinese saber rattling across the strait while preserving peace and stability and reassuring us, and reassuring our bona fide in keeping a one China policy intact and keeping peace and stability across the strait as our ultimate goal. And so, what we have witnessed has been a change in the diplomatic language of bilateral and multilateral statements, provisions also of military platforms and components to Taiwan, especially from the US and Japan, but to some extent also European players have been helping out Taiwan with dual-use military assets. And we have also witnessed, as a byproduct of this unity of the two theaters, more military deployments in the region, including across the Taiwan Strait. And we have seen Europe increasing its profile in terms of the number of diplomats stationed in their representation office in Taiwan, but also of talking security with Taiwan, talking security with Taiwanese counterparts in terms of cyber defense, combating disinformation, and also civil defense, so humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, including man-made disasters, right? Not just natural disasters. Now, I will conclude and skip the policy recommendations, which we can talk at length during Eleonora's discussion and the Q&A. What we're witnessing today, and I have it on very good ground, that Europe is talking less Taiwan and is prioritizing less Taiwan as a byproduct of us being sandwiched between the second Trump administration's policies, including its adversarial policy on Europe. First and foremost, punitive tariffs and the threat of the United States forward deployment pulling out of Europe altogether. So us needing to take care of the European theater on our own. But also, in many ways, the fears of Chinese export controls on rare earth materials, and they have a monopoly power over rare earth materials, and the necessity for Europe to also take care of its own house, not just its own strategic theater, but also of its own domestic politics. This inability to Europe to act as a geopolitical player feeds in many ways also our reactivity to policies and policy measures that are desiderata elsewhere. So very much like what I've mentioned earlier of Europe raising its profile on the security overtures across the Taiwan Strait as a byproduct, yes, of our own interests, including of maintaining an international rule of law at sea, maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, yes, and of an order, an international order that is free from coercion. But, and I go back to my earlier point, this was very much a byproduct of moral suasion campaigns and horse trading from the United States government and to some extent also Japan. But really what matters here is the fact that Europe, by virtue of receiving assistance from the US in Ukraine, was debtor to US policies aimed at uniting the two theaters. Now that the US government's policies are aimed at delinking the two theaters militarily, and the Trump administration has explicitly asked European counterparts through the Department of Defense to stay at home, to take care of our own strategic theater, now we have to see whether Europe's overtures towards Taiwan are homebred or not. This is a perfect test case of how history will tell us whether we are just a reflection of what happens in Washington, D.C., also because of our status as secondary powers relative to Washington, D.C., or whether, in fact, we can raise the flag. And in the policy paper that Aurelio and I have written, try to effectively present a roadmap that is constructive and that tries to push forward on low-dangling fruits where we can actually be of help to Taiwan on issues that transcend geography. And so, for instance, cyber defense, combating disinformation, where we can actually learn a lot from Taiwan rather than Taiwan from us. Or, in fact, in terms of sharing intelligence with Taiwan, including maritime domain awareness. Or, in fact, where we can deny China a sphere of influence in Southeast Asia or in the Pacific Islands, and by exchanging notes with Taiwan and like-minded partners, we can actually finally develop connectivity initiatives to build up infrastructure projects in the global south, especially in the Pacific, so that we buttress the number of countries that still recognize Taiwan. The 12 countries that still have made possible for Taiwan to present a measure of statehood that goes beyond the Weberian definition of statehood, right? In international law, statehood can be declarative, meaning that you have a monopoly of power over a specific set of borders, and Taiwan has given proof of that. But you have a constitutive theory of statehood that effectively recognizes statehood on the basis of which other states recognize Taiwan. And so Europe can actually help Taiwan by beefing up the aid and the connectivity aid to the remainder 12 states that still recognize the Republic of China, Taiwan. And we can do it in coordination with the United States and Japan and other like-minded partners. Because again, we don't need to send military assets all the way to the other side of the world. And last but not least, I would like to present to you a security and defense partnership agreements that Europe has with the likes of Japan, the Republic of Korea, South Korea, and in the future, Australia. We can actually develop new types of weapon systems and new defense collaboration projects with access to European monies and resources that are going to be aplenty thanks to the desiderata in Washington, D.C. for a 5% to GDP benchmark, NATO benchmark by 2035. So there is the potential to actually engage in defense industrial cooperation projects, including standardization of weapon systems and ammunition, which may come handy in a Taiwan kinetic scenario. In the event of a contingency scenario across the Taiwan Strait, just like in Ukraine, ammunition and logistical support that is sustained across time have always been a problem. And so it is possible for Europe, by helping itself out in the event of a contingency closer to its borders, to actually help out Taiwan. And I'll conclude with this slide, and I'm sorry for actually being the over-loquacious Italian in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulio. No worries, because we had a plenty of time, not infinite, but we had enough time also to give the floor to our discussant, Eleonora Pennino. I have already introduced her to you, and I immediately give the floor to Eleonora for her comments.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Professor, for giving me the chance to take up this role of discussing today. First of all, let me congratulate you, Professor Pugliese, and your co-author for this impressive and very detailed paper, which is not only rich in information, but also very thoughtful in the way it connects the big strategic picture with the diplomatic and political nuances of the One China policy. What I found especially strong is how the paper shows that this policy, the One China policy, both for the US and its partners, has always been more flexible and dynamic than we usually think. So definitely it's not a frozen formula, but rather it's something that has evolved over time, depending how countries have tried to keep a balance between deterrence and reassurance, and between values and stability, as mentioned and rightly exposed in your paper. So let me start with 3 points that I personally think are really important in your argument. First, the paper highlights how the language and ambiguity have worked as useful diplomatic tools. The subtle differences on the peculiar and different One China policies according to different states, like saying acknowledge or understand and respect, might sound technical, but they actually give democratic countries some room to maneuver to show support for Taiwan without breaching and crossing Beijing red lines. Second, you did a really great job in showing how the US and Japan especially have adjusted their policies over time, from Trump's rather transactional and sometimes unpredictable approach in the first mandate to Biden's more value-based and coalition-driven one. And now with the Asia First logic of the second Trump administration, we see in your paper, I saw clearly a clear line of continuity, but also it gives a picture also of a potential growing tensions in the area. So the concept of integrated deterrence with Japan and, as you mentioned, other players like Philippines, Australia, and European partners, he's definitely a major innovation of approach, but it also brings new risk of escalation. And then third, the section on Taiwan itself, I found it more interesting and very important, as you reminded us that internal politics on the island, especially which is the cohabitation between the Democratic Progressive Party president and a parliament led by the opposition, deeply affects Taiwan defense and foreign policy. In other words, Taiwan's resilience is not only about weapons or alliances, as you already mentioned, but also about political unity, public trust, and democratic strength. So now I continue with my questions. My first question is related to the ambiguity of the EU's One China policy. The paper shows a clear distinction between the EU's One China policy and the People's Republic of China's One China principle. However, there remains some ambiguity about the operational implications. The paper puts forward a twin-track approach that combines diplomacy and realistic deterrence, which is definitely like an ideal and compelling idea, but it also raises a broader question, which is how far the EU can go in supporting Taiwan's international participation without crossing Beijing's red lines, especially if it has to take its own stance and not depending from the US approach. Then my second question is related to the role of EU institutions and the priorities within the European Union. The literary review of the paper on EU's engagement in foreign policy distinguishes between national, intergovernmental, and supranational system within the EU policy. From this comparative perspective, as I am familiar with, parliamentary diplomacy emerges as one of the best practices that the EU could effectively adapt as a low-risk tool. Indeed, by empowering legislators rather than executives, countries have managed in general, and they deepened relations with Taiwan without breaching the formal commitment to Beijing. For example, for instance, France, and you mentioned this clearly in your paper in a clear way, France's quiet activism demonstrates that this is possible, and it is possible to expand Taiwan's strategic space without breaking one China construct. However, EU institutions with the Commission, the European External Action Service, and the Council operate under a far more cautious logic than member states. And here I would have liked to see more in this paper on how intra-European divergence, say between Central and Eastern Europe's activism, as we saw recently with the Lithuanian stance and initiatives with Taiwan, and Western, and on the other side, Western Europe's restraint. How this divergence, internal divergence, might affect the EU's collective position. So the question is in your view, a risk that parliamentary diplomacy, while useful symbolically, could outpace executive policy and create inconsistencies in Europe's China strategies. Yet, this raises a question of who actually drives EU policy on Taiwan. And then what will a truly European approach to Taiwan look like? One that combines European principles and democratic values on one side with national priorities and executive pragmatism on the other. So finally, eventually, does the EU have the institutional coherence necessary to implement a tripartite strategy? Then my third question, pay attention more on the balancing of economic dependence and strategic deterrence. The paper highlights China's economic weight and the 2025 rare earth embargo, and underlines that any deterrence from the European side, any deterrence strategy must take into account the asymmetry of economic dependence between the EU and China. But can the EU deter coercion by a country on which it remains structurally dependent for key inputs? And what will the realistic deterrence European posture look like for a power whose main leverage is economic and normative rather than military? And yes, your paper analyzes, as already mentioned, how US policies has oscillated between deterrence and reassurance. The first Trump administration adopted, as you mentioned also, your discussion, a primacist view, seeking overwhelming military superiority, and confronting China head-on, even at the risk of escalation. Then the Biden-Harris administration maintained that path, but added, as you said, a Wilsonian nuance, So reframing Taiwan not just a geopolitical pawn for its strategic position, but as a part of a broader defense of democratic values. And indeed, as you showed with your slide, the Biden administration especially worked with allies under the like-minded partners umbrella, favoring trade also between Japan and now Germany with the semiconductor leading TSMC company, which is called this chip diplomacy. And nowadays, with the current second Trump administration, it's particularly interesting and worrying at the same time because these Asia first strategies delinking the Indo-Pacific from the Euro-Atlantic theater, Washington seems to be hardening its stance on Taiwan while losing its adherence to the One China policy framework. This could intensify the security dilemma that the paper described, that you described, and in the sense that every step to deter China fuels new coercive behavior across the state. And for Europe, the risk is twofold: a deepening U.S.-China confrontation, but also an erosion of diplomatic ambiguity, this diplomatic strategic ambiguity that still helps prevent open conflict. Because we're all aware, as you also already mentioned, that Europe will never be able to confront China on this I don't know, potential situation. Given that the United States might become more inward-looking under the new administration. So my question here is, can Europe realistically take on a bigger role in its station alone? My final question, I know there are so big questions. My final question is related to internal political. My final question. Yeah. I mean, most of them are very linked. The last one, okay. My fourth and last question is on internal political constraints within the EU and Taiwan. I already mentioned the fragmentation within the European Union foreign policy asset and the players involved. But at the same time, also recent development on also in dealing with the Taiwan internal situation, the European Union will face some difficulties, especially in recent developments inside Taiwan. President Lai's cohabitation with the opposition control the legislative yuan, the political polarization, and the budgetary battles over defense spending further complicate Europe's engagement. As you mentioned in the paper, the EU must avoid partisan involvement in Taiwan's domestic politics, which could unintentionally align it with one party or political camp and thereby undermine its stated goal of supporting democracy as a system rather than a party, a Taiwanese party. However, for instance, a few days ago, Xi Jinping, as it was for previous elections, congratulated with the Kuomintang, the chairperson newly elected, giving it, in my very personal opinion, a sort of endorsement to the opposition of current Taiwanese government. This, however, without never reconsidering or giving any benefit of the doubt about what it is the final objective of the People's Republic of China government. So that's a key question is, can the EU maintain principled support for Taiwan's democracy writ large, while insulating its engagement from Taiwan's own domestic polarization. And yet, given the richness of methodology that you used for this research, combining conceptual theories, empirical investigation with primary documents, but especially with conducting elite interviews to actors belonging to both sides of the spectrum, I am genuinely wondering, especially given the multiple level state actors' visit of G7 allies to Taipei, and likewise after the COVID-19 pandemic, which political parties are more involved in these meetings from the Taiwanese part? That's it.
Thank you, Eleonora. The building closed at 8, so I think you have enough time. And despite also the richness, and you have received in a highlight of how in depth we are going to deal with this issue in our Taiwan Studies Center, I'm opening for a QA session in order to gather all the inputs, comments, and questions, moreover, to Giulio. And then I will give the floor to Giulio for... And criticism, moreover, because, we like particularly this one. We are not dialectic materialists, but we are criticists, actually. So, the floor is open. Questions? Please. Our director, his Chinese name is Dadu.
Thank you, Matteo. And thank you, Giulio and Eleonora, for this very exhaustive presentation and discussion. Well, I'm pretty much a fan of Thomas Merton's theory of self-fulfilling prophecies. And what do you think? Is there any risk that pursuing a confrontational stance, let's say so, in the Taiwan Straits or in the surrounding areas could or might lead to an actual confrontation? Because we know that perceptions and wrong perceptions are almost equally important than actual strategies in shaping international politics. What do you think?
Chachi?
Too many questions, right? Oh, no. Okay, I have a very last questions. Okay, recently, because we were talking about European Union, EU, right? Recently, European Parliament rejects China's distortion of United Nations resolution number 2758. So I would like to ask Professor Pugliese about your opinion, because the European Parliament delegation for relations with the People's Republic China issued a statement after the recent 42nd EU-China interparliamentary meeting. So after that, and the European Parliament side, they rejected any distortion or misrepresentation of this fact, particularly with regards to the United Nations resolution number 2758. So they said peace and stability in Taiwan Straits are in the interest of the European Union and the world. And then the European Union rejects any changes to the states, particularly through force or coercions. And the European Union will continue to pursue close cooperation with Taiwan. So I want to ask Professor Pugliese, what do you think about this recent meeting? Thank you.
Any other question or input from the floor, from the audience? Okay. Please, can you come here and talk at the microphone in order to be, yeah.
So that we hear you, so that everybody hears. Yeah. You can come, yeah, please.
If you can kindly introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I'm a student from the continent of China, and I would like to ask a question to the professor that between economic support to armies and economic support to benefit of people, that we know that recently in the city of Hualien, there's a flood catastrophe. It's really a bad catastrophe. And I would like to ask if it will have more impact, the economic support on the benefits or the economic support on the armies. Thank you. That's a very little question.
As a carrot or economic coercion as a stick?
Please, would you repeat?
No, I wasn't asking for a clarification. You were asking about economic support to Hualien.
For example, Hualien, like other economic support for benefits, like support the damage that has caused from the natural catastrophe, and other, for example, non-benefit associations for support the people, like the other classes of people, in different classes of people in Taiwan. It will have more impact like this, or it will have more impact for the army support.
And you're thinking of support coming from within Taiwan?
Yeah.
From within?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Other questions or criticisms, as Giulio asked for? No, okay. So.
Okay, I have 2 hours, right?
Yeah, you have 2 hours. I don't know if they are enough, but we will try to keep into.
Yeah. I'm sorry, in the interest of everybody's time, I will really limit myself to 10 minutes. Well, I'll try. But let me start with the toughest question, the one on Hualien, because I'm not a Taiwan expert in the strict sense. But what I can say is that Hualien is a very interesting region of Taiwan, if I'm not mistaken, where the Speaker of Legislative Yuan comes from, who is from the Kuomintang, traditionally. And he, at least there are stories that since it's an impoverished region in the eastern coast of Taiwan, it actually is very often the target of China's economic statecraft, meaning that there is a preferential access given to melons and produce that comes from Hualien to effectively empower legislators and members of the Legislative Yuan that can be sympathetic to the policies of the People's Republic. So it's also connected to what we were talking today. I can't answer, however, the very specific question on the aid that comes to Hualien specific to the aftermath of the catastrophe of the disaster you just highlighted. But it's true that Taiwan is a very resilient society, and it has a lot of support, as it has been the case from its international players as well. The US and Japan made a very swift response during the COVID-19 pandemic in providing AstraZeneca vaccines to Taiwan. And I'm sure that the very interests also of the mainland in helping out Hualien and parts of China, of Taiwan, of the Republic of China, Taiwan, close to the Chinese Communist Party in terms of legislators and representatives, we'll also see a steady inflow of aid coming from across the strait. But again, I've warned you, I can't do justice to your question because I'm not a Taiwan expert in the strict sense. I'm more of an IR of East Asia expert. Now, to go instead in reverse order to what is effectively Eleonora's first question and Professor Wu's question on UN Resolution 2758, 2758. Effectively, the People's Republic of China, One China principle, distorts and bends down the UN Resolution 2758. That was the resolution that allowed representation of the People's Republic of China as the sole representative government of China at the United Nations. Yeah, we have to open a parenthesis here, because Chiang Kai-shek was asked if he wanted to actually have his own representation as representative of another polity, not representing China, and Chiang Kai-shek refused it. So maybe Taiwan, the Republic of China of Taiwan, missed a chance back in 1971 of having a one China and a one Taiwan sitting at the United Nations. And the United Nations 2758 resolution effectively claims that the People's Republic of China is the sole representative of China, but it does not claim that Taiwan is part of China. And this is effectively the nature of the very important reason why you will learn the very complicated hocus pocus and jargon around the One China policy and what China refers to, which is One China principle. And in more recent years, it has tried to bend this recognition as the sole representative of the government that represent China, as including control over Taiwan, right? But this is not what all G7 players, including the EU, which sits in the G7, oddly enough, have agreed to. All G7 players, including Japan, have agreed to a One China policy that is the acknowledgement that the People's Republic of China represents China, yes, is the government that represents China, but when it comes to the status of Taiwan, we usually refer to that as, okay, we take note of China's position, we respect China's position, we acknowledge China's position. So there are different intensities in meaning, but effectively this is all ambiguity, yeah, that recognizes that even semi-sovereign states have their own rights. And Taiwan, as a semi-sovereign state, what Max Weber would use as the very definition of a state, that you have sole control and monopoly of force over specific borders, that to all effects is a state, right? Even according to the declarative theory of international law. And we can't possibly ignore the rights and plights of 24 million people who have decided themselves to call themselves the Republic of China, Taiwan, right? With their own police forces and their own military, but to all effects have not just effective control, but their own lives, their own passports, their own sometimes identity, and their own languages, and so their own state to all effects. And then, and this is where it becomes tricky, then there is what I and Aurelio think is a more destabilizing move of, in fact, moving away from the ambiguity proper of a one China policy that until now has kept the peace. And yes, it has been challenged by China's own one China principle lawfare of stealing away Taiwan's own democratic counterparts, and of claiming that the UN resolution 2758 effectively concedes that Taiwan is part of China, which is not the case. What we're seeing, however, nowadays is that that specific type of lawfare, and you will study this, I'm sure, within the Taiwan Studies Center and the IR department, there is an emphasis on hybrid strategy, and the use and abuse of law, domestic law and international law, can have effects in international relations and strategic scenarios. Well, that lawfare is being contrasted with another kind of lawfare, one that aims at an embryonic form of a one China, one Taiwan policy, where some G7 states have been pushing for inclusion of Taiwan in international organizations tout court, meaning international organizations including those that require statehood. And that de facto is an embryonic recognition of Taiwan as a state. And that is, as you can see, China's salami slicing and slicing away the one China policy and turning it into a one China principle is met with salami slicing on the opposite side of effectively trying to help Taiwan by dangling the threat to China that we are ready to recognize Taiwan as a state altogether. That is all nice and good in a kinetic scenario. That I understand when you need the legal framework to foster government-to-government relations at the military level, intelligence need to talk to each other, and when you actually also need in crisis situations, the ability to tell, look, we are actually going to recognize Taiwan if you do not stop your coercion. But dangling policies of not having a one China policy, or actually insisting on and advocating for Taiwan to be part of international organizations tout court, which has actually started with the end tail of the Biden administration and has characterized the beginning of the second Trump administration. That is probably not very helpful in fostering peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And there is an acknowledgement, and I see that evidently in the joint statements between the EU and Japan at the summit level. There is an acknowledgement at the EU level that there is a distinction, yes, between China's one China principle and the EU's own one China policy. But there is also a distinction between an embryonic one China, one Taiwan policy that some G7 members insist upon and what the EU position is, which is still consistent with the one China policy. So very much in line with what the Parliament, the European Parliament has written about and insisted on. And this has been 3 questions covered so far. But I'll be brief. What can the European Union do? The European Union, of course, is a beast with many heads and a lot of bodies. And as you mentioned, Eleonora, it is an international intergovernmental organization that has also supranational remit. I would tackle your question very briefly by adding some of the points you highlighted, by highlighting and repeating the points you stressed, that is that the EU is much more than the sum of its parts, especially its member states. And that is especially true under the geopolitical, quote unquote, Commission of von der Leyen, where Ursula von der Leyen, as president of the Commission, and her chief of staff have a lot of interest in de-risking away from China. That is traditionally part of the economic remit of the European Union, unlike foreign and security policy. But there is also a growing voice from member states other than the usual suspects, especially as France and Germany, the usual suspects, have internal problems that they need to take care of, including fractured politics and elections to take care of, or in fact, major coalition governments that tend to be inconsistent in their China policies. This is particularly true, for instance, with the preceding Olaf Scholz government, where clearly the SPD was aiming at a different China policy from the Green Party. And so what you see is a degree of greater consistency and also of greater voice coming from Central and Eastern European countries, because their leverage grew after Russia's war in Ukraine, because they are border countries and because they had a much more coherent voice compared to France and Germany, which couldn't even sort out what to think and say with regards to China and Taiwan. And let's be very honest here. It's true, to touch on the very points I made in my presentation, that Central and Eastern European countries are evidence number one and number two of the bad press that China got during the COVID pandemic with wolf warrior diplomacy, of bullying tactics against Lithuania, of supporting, even if indirectly, Russia's war economy. And so the guys who are on the first line of fire are the Baltics, Poland, the Central and Eastern European players, minus Hungary, which is an exceptional case. But it is also true that these very states depend very much on the United States. And they depend so much on the United States at the NATO level, in terms of military assistance, that they are the first to concede to US moral suasion campaigns with regards to China and Taiwan. Why does Czechia, a landlocked country, have an Indo-Pacific strategy, and the Indo-Pacific is a maritime region? Yes, Czechia has traditionally had a very strong ideological, also historical way of dealing with its past, its communist past. And that's where you see also alternation in power in Czechia, and the future government in Czechia might actually be much more China-friendly than the current one, of alternating between a pro-China and a sort of like pro-Taiwan policy. There is that. But there is also a willingness to cater to the United States, as there is for arguably in Lithuania, beyond the sympathies and the idiosyncrasies of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which was a very combative Minister of Foreign Affairs. There is certainly also a willingness to please policymakers in Washington, D.C. And this is maybe coming to a halt and coming into question as the policies in Washington, D.C. are changing. And this brings me to your very point. If the EU is such a composite beast, it is true that with the advent of the second Trump administration, you have seen the Commission and European member states toying with the idea of sending olive branches to China because of not wanting to be in the first line of fire vis-a-vis Trump, the multi-composite offensive. And you see, in fact, the Parliament as the beacon of the very normative values that the European Union pretends to be in favor of. And that's, in many ways, part of the genesis, in my opinion, of this paper. It was launched by the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament to keep, Taiwan under the radar map, and do so with a degree of realistic expectations of what Europe can do, precisely because the picture is so composite. And I would argue that the Republic of China Taiwan has been very cognizant that parliamentary diplomacy is the way to go in terms of its own public diplomacy efforts, of engagement at the bilateral level, precisely because it runs beneath the One China policy, because you can actually work without the government. And so you can actually then shape the measures, the policy measures that can be baked and take shape in the future. And what can these policies be at the European level concretely? I think that precisely because much of the leeway is at the member states level, and there is a degree of echoing of desiderata also elsewhere, and of a very changing landscape as the one in the United States, I think what the European Parliament can do is that it can provide frameworks, such as the one mentioned earlier by Professor Wu, of contrasting China's own lawfare through its own One China principle. And those frameworks can be referenced to. What the European Parliament can also do is that it can also set up budget lines and budget voices by providing pots of monies that then can be taken advantage by member states. The CHIPS Act, for instance, necessarily needed to also go through European parliamentary approval. And this can then be downloaded by Germany, which necessarily, to initiate a chip factory in Dresden, a TSMC factory in Dresden, if I'm not mistaken, had to also then bolster and strengthen its relationship with Taiwan, also by sending its Minister of Education. So you see, there is a triangulation and a kind of linkage. And the same can actually take place when and if more monies and more frameworks will be available in terms of defense industrial collaboration frameworks, defense frameworks also aimed at fostering the capacity within Europe. That, as I mentioned earlier, can, through issue linkage, foster the capabilities of allies, European allies such as the United States, but also of those who have now a security and defense partnership, such as Japan, South Korea, Australia in the future. And last but not least, the European Parliament can make moral suasion campaigns by appropriating some of the policies we highlight, such as making sure that the area study strengths that Europe can be built also by allowing the Republic of China, Taiwan into the Horizon framework projects. We provocatively argue that Taiwan can also have a bilateral investment agreement, or much more provocatively, a free trade agreement with Europe, as the EU has a very fraught relationship with both the United States and China. We shouldn't forget that New Zealand, back during the Ma Ying-jeou government, was able to actually have the best of both worlds, a free trade agreement with China and a free trade agreement with Taiwan, with the Republic of China, Taiwan, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe not as comprehensive as the one with China, but still, maybe there is room for a bilateral investment agreement with Taiwan, which in many ways is keeping many European delegates on their toes for fear of angering China, and this shouldn't be the case. With regards then, finally, to close off on the three final questions. Sorry, on very briefly on dependencies vis-a-vis Russia, on China, I would argue that yes, China is 10 times Russia's economy, and it has monopoly over resources that can be hardly ever de-risked from, or we can't build an alternative supply chain, just as the one that we were able to build with oil and gas away from Russia. We have now the United States becoming our main exporter of hydrocarbons in Europe, of gas effectively. And we have been able, witness the links between Italy and Algeria and other MENA countries, we have been able to diversify slowly but steadily, and still we import Russian resources. We have been able to diversify by sanctioning Russia only at a decent level now in 2025. It is impossible to diversify, as you mentioned, from some resources that come from China, such as rare earths. And on top of that, the Chinese economy is 10 times the size of Russia. And so what does this mean? But sanctions, in order to work, need to bite. They need to bite the target of those sanctions, but they can't boomerang. If sanctions start to boomerang and bite those who sanction, it's the end of the actual effectivity of sanctions altogether. And sanctions arguably haven't even bitten Russia as much as we would have liked. So this takes me to the point, we need to be realistic in our deterrence efforts. And that's why I mentioned efforts in other types of agenda settings, such as the diplomatic one, the supply of capacity building, including military capacity via triangulation. And I think what needs to be said with regards to the direction of travel of the US-China relationship is that the MAGA camp and the president's own willingness is clearly aimed at a grand bargain with China over Taiwan, or at the very least at moving the line of defense away from Taiwan because it's too costly. This is the thinking of the vice president, of J.D. Vance. This is also the thinking of Donald J. Trump, who on top of that has a patrimonial understanding of high office, meaning that he wants to get something out of it by giving new language to China over perhaps the management of cross-strait relations. He will get a deal from China. But this is not easy in the context of what is the nature of US politics today, because the defense industrial complex, or what Eisenhower called the military industrial complex, is pretty much focused on the China challenge. It's pretty much focused on balancing China and containing China across the first island chain. And public opinion and the politics of China within Congress are still very much focused on China as the principal challenge. So this is to say that it's very hard for Trump to and the MAGA people to do the kind of grand bargains that they aim at. Certainly what is happening is that there is a militarization also of Taiwan and of Japan by virtue of dangling the threat of pulling out, of doing a deal on the shoulders of Taiwan, of throwing Taiwan under the bus. Certainly there is the ability for the US government to exact the same level of military spending relative to GDP also on its Asian allies. Taiwan, Japan will have new national defense strategies that, as the ones announced by President Lai, that will showcase much more military spending relative to GDP. And yes, the problem that I foresee is the ability for the Chinese Communist Party to drive wedges. But it is also true that we have to be faithful to the letter of peace and stability, of our willingness to achieve peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, meaning the ability for both sides of the strait to talk to each other and to decide for themselves what is best for their future. This means that there needs to be recognition of coercive tactics coming from the PRC and the ability to then empower the Republic of China, Taiwan, to contrast those coercive tactics. But at the same time, to give space to those members of the Legislative UN who now sit in big numbers, who are on board increasing defense budgets. They are on board increasing defense budgets, but perhaps see some initiatives such as the whole of society defense resilience initiative as politically mandated and as part of the political divisions within Taiwan. There is a certain expediency, that's for sure, but I still don't see the Kuomintang as a whole as doing the heavy bidding of the PRC. I see the Kuomintang itself being split within a minority of pro-PRC, pro-mainland members of the Legislative UN, but I still see the majority of public opinion in Taiwan taking both the DPP and the Kuomintang and the TPP to the center. That is, no formal declaration of independence and no massive moves from the government that will imperil peace and stability, because prosperity is embedded also in good relations with the mainland, but also of pulling away the pro-mainland parts of the Kuomintang in policies that can actually put at risk Taiwanese autonomy. And you see this with the sunflower movement. You see this with a society that is pretty much respectful and has a lot of gratitude to the military, to its own military, that respects its own civil servants, and that is also growing receptive to extended military service and to beefing up its own security. So in the end, it's up to the Taiwanese people to decide. And I think that the Taiwanese society is so resilient that can actually be a factor of its own. But we need to pay attention to, because unfortunately, and to conclude, power politics does prize speaking with portions of the political spectrum more than others. Not just the CCP speaking with the Kuomintang as their preferential partner, but also sometimes the US and Japan and others having a preferential partners in parts of the political spectrum, precisely because sometimes interests are not necessarily specific to Taiwan, but they are geopolitical in nature. And so I think with that, I think I've also tackled your question about who speaks with whom. And I'm happy to get more feedback, but I'm very sorry for actually being this talkative. So with that, I'll conclude.
So we have benefit for the knowledge of our distinguished host, cleverly urged by our discussant. And so I thank everybody for participating in this first day of activity of the Taiwan Studies Center. Thank you again for all participating, for our speakers, and we look forward for many other occasions of debate, of culture, and also enjoying the meaning of this knowledge between these two parts of the world, and including also for debating the Taiwanese democracy, not only the economy, that we will deal with in the next months. So thank you again, everybody. Grazie Max. Grazie.
Piacere. Abbiamo dei regalini per i ospiti.